repairing a leaking faucet, installing a ceiling fan, or sealing bathroom tiles. These small home repair jobs can be intimidating for many people today. Only the boldest and most experienced among us would consider building a whole house. Even fewer would accept the challenge of building a house with primitive tools, limited resources, and little or no outside assistance. However, for homesteaders coming on the frontier in the late 19th century, building a home was the first critical step toward obtaining the free land granted by the United States government. Most of us see a frontier house as a rustic log cabin located in a serene mountain valley or on a wide green plain, ornamented with patchwork quilts, butter churns, cast iron pans, and other simple but attractive furnishings. In reality, the little house on the prairie was often not much more than a drafty shack or a hastily dug hole in the ground. After their lengthy, painful, and dirty treks to the frontier, settlers frequently found themselves living in tight, uncomfortable, and filthy quarters. Mrs. Eva Nelson, a pioneer who came in Montana in the 1880s, articulated a sentiment common among homesteaders when she said, "My heart sank the first time I saw the shanty my husband had built. I was really dejected, and I began to wish we had never left home." Modern Americans on remote camping expeditions are frequently more comfortable than homesteaders in their homes. The provisions of the Homestead Act largely shaped frontier home design and construction. The act required homesteaders to build a dwelling at least 10 by 12 feet in size and include at least one glass window, along with making other improvements to the land. Since over half of all homesteaders eventually gave up their claims before completing the 5-year proving up period, it was often impractical and unwise to invest heavily in home construction. Frugality was a homesteader's main priority when building a dwelling. Settlers used the cheapest and most readily available materials to construct their houses. These homes were often designed to be disposable or easily improvable when the proving up time came. Comfort was often a secondary concern. Many homesteaders waited several weeks or even months after arriving on the frontier to build semi-permanent housing. The immediate and critical needs of obtaining food, planting crops, and filing claims forced many to continue living in their wagons or tents long after their journeys had ended. When it came to building, log cabins were the most desirable dwelling choice for homesteaders. Its relatively simple construction, resistance to wind and water, and long-lasting sturdiness made it one of the most comfortable choices. Henry Bierman, who homesteaded in Montana in the 1880s, was astonished when he visited his old cabin in 1939 and found it still standing. Though it was badly rotted at the bottom, the roof and logs remained intact. Homesteaders could often build a log cabin in just a few days using only an axe and auger, without the need for nails. The first step was constructing a stone or rock foundation to keep the logs off the ground and prevent rot. Once the foundation was set, settlers would cut down trees and square off the logs. These logs were notched at the top and bottom of each end and then stacked to form walls. The notched logs interlocked at the corners, holding the walls in place. After stacking the logs, the settlers had to chink the cabin by pushing sticks and wood chips into the cracks and filling the rest with a homemade cement comprised of dirt, sand, and water. Fireplaces were built of stone, often with stick and mud chimneys. Due to the scarcity of smooth boards, most cabins had dirt or gravel floors, which had to be raked daily to maintain their evenness. The typical log cabin measured 10 by 20 feet, regardless of how many people lived in it. Settlers maximized their space by constructing lofts across the cabin roof or adding lean-tos at the back. Generally, frontier cabins had just one room that served as the kitchen, dining room, living room, workroom, and bedroom. A family of 6 to 10 persons would often dwell in a single log cabin. In the treeless expanses of the plains and prairies, log cabins were not an option. In areas where settlers might have to travel 60 miles to find a single tree, homesteaders turned to the ground beneath their feet for shelter. The sod house, or Soddy, became one of the most common dwellings in the frontier West. The tall, robust grasses of the plains had tight, complicated root systems, and the dirt that surrounded them could be cut into flexible yet sturdy bricks. Ground soaked by rain or melting snow was perfect for starting sod house construction. When the earth was soft and moist, homesteaders would use an ox or horse-drawn sod cutter, similar to a farming plow, to break the soil. The sod cutter produced long, narrow strips of sod, which could then be chopped into bricks with an axe. The sod bricks, which were 2 to 3 feet square and 4 inches thick, were then stacked to create the walls of the home. Soddy roofs were built by placing a thin layer of interlocking twigs, thin branches, and hay, which was then topped with more sod. Many sod houses were built into the sides of hills or banks, saving time as settlers could simply carve out a space in the hill and build only a front wall and roof. Because of their thick walls, sod houses stayed cool in the summer and warm in the winter. They were also very affordable. One settler in Montana in 1870 reported spending only $2.78 to build his entire sod home. However, sod house living had its downsides. The house, which was composed of dirt and grass, was continuously overrun with bugs, rats, snakes, and other creatures. A sod house settler mourned. Every afternoon, the rattlesnakes would emerge from their concealed burrows in the walls and roof to sun themselves on the western windowsill. Even the best sod roofs tended to leak, turning indoor dirt floors into a quagmire. Wet roofs took days to dry out, and the enormous weight of the wet earth often caused roofs to collapse. Even in the best weather, sod houses had their challenges. When the sod roof became extremely dry, dirt and grass would fall inside like rain. According to one settler's manual, an umbrella is essential for preparing meals in the sod hut. A lady went to see friends in their border sod house and reported, "I hadn't been sleeping long when I was startled awake by what appeared to be fine hail dropping on my face and hands. I said, 'Please fetch a light. There is something dropping on my face, hands, and all over the bed.' This awoke the lady of the house, who observed, 'It is merely dirt dropping out of the sod that our home is constructed of, and when the wind blows it dries and crumbles off. We're used to it, so it doesn't worry us. But I couldn't sleep because I was terrified that the whole house might fall on us at any moment.' As soon as homesteaders saved up enough money, many moved out of their sod houses for more comfortable living quarters. Others opted to improve their sod homes by adding exterior boards, giving them a more finished appearance. Within a few years, most abandoned sod houses were completely reclaimed by the plains, eroded by wind and rain. When railroads reached the frontier, as they did in Montana in 1880, new homesteaders had easy access to goods like timber, tar paper, and shingles. The sod house was quickly abandoned in favor of the board and batten claim shanty, as it was much easier for settlers to build a frame shelter than to cut and stack sod bricks. Homestead shanties, like the log cabins and sod houses before them, typically consisted of one small room. They were often built directly on the ground with a dirt floor and no foundation. The walls of these shanties were made of studs, horizontal boxing, and a layer of tar paper held in place by lath. On the windswept prairies, the relentless winds could literally tear the walls off a shanty. If the walls held, the poorly anchored shanties could still topple over and blow away. Although shanties were more comfortable than sod houses in many ways, they were extremely difficult to heat in the winter and unbearably hot in the summer. One Montana woman said she could bake bread in July by placing it on a heated tar paper wall. Shanties appealed to homesteaders due to their portability. When families with adult or nearly adult children made multiple claims in the same area, they would move the shanty from claim to claim as proving up times approached and visits from land office inspectors became imminent. When settlers married, one would often relocate their shanty to their spouse's claim to double the size of their home. After proving up, shanties were easily expanded and improved. Many buildings that began as claim shanties remain in use throughout the plains and prairies to this day. When Pamelia Dillon Fergus arrived in Virginia City, Montana in 1864, after crossing the plains in a wagon train with her children, her family moved into a log cabin with a sod roof built by her husband James. Although the nerve-wracking weeks of travel were behind her, and she could now sleep under a solid roof, Pamelia faced a new challenge common to all settlers, transforming her rough frontier house into a true home. In 1861, Mark Twain reported in Roughing It that he saw a sod home at a stage station between St. Joseph, Missouri and Carson City, Nevada. It was the first time he had ever seen a man's front yard on top of his house. Livestock often grazed on top of sod houses, and women sometimes planted flowers on the roofs to beautify their homes, but the charm ended there. Sod roofs leaked during rainstorms and sometimes collapsed, while rats and snakes frequently made surprise appearances. The sod house, or Soddy, became common on the plains after 1850 because it was an affordable shelter made from readily available materials. A Nebraska Soddy from around 1886 cost $13.75, indicating it likely belonged to a wealthier family that could afford lumber, tar paper, and nails for construction. Sod bricks, also known as prairie marble, were cut from the ground and stacked with the grass side down. The joints of the 50-pound bricks were filled with mud. Double sod stacks formed the walls, providing warmth in the winter and coolness in the summer. A typical one-room Soddy, measuring 16 by 20 feet, featured wooden door and window frames, with windows initially made of isinglass and later of glass. Hard-packed earth served as the flooring for most grass roofs, which were constructed by first placing brush on rafters and then covering them with sod bricks. These residences offered comforts such as cross-stitched samplers, curtains, bedspreads with patchwork quilts, and carpets made of cow and buffalo hides, especially for the women settlers from the east, who were sometimes shocked to find themselves living in buildings constructed of soil. For furniture, trunks were repurposed into benches and cupboards, and crates and barrels were used as chairs. Living in a sod house was inevitably dirty. To combat the filth, women covered the walls and ceilings with muslin that had to be removed and washed twice a year. Some also made wallpaper out of newsprint. Umbrellas were placed over stoves, sick children, and newborn babies to protect them from falling dirt and vermin. To keep rats and other pests away, people used kerosene oil and sometimes firearms. Surviving in a sod house required ingenuity. Emma Brown of Mitchell County, Kansas, remembered how her husband had moved a herd of cattle to Abilene in 1870, leaving her alone in the Soddy. Her husband's trip had involved rain that washed away the roads and bridges, making it impossible for him to get home. Emma and her kids went to a neighbor's dugout when the Soddy's roof started to leak. When the dugout ultimately filled with water, they took refuge behind some boards. She went back to her own muddy Soddy after a day in the sun, but the rain came with her. "I pulled the leaves off the table and put the children to sleep underneath it," she said, "and they slept there as soundly as healthy children sleep."